The sound of a chalk snapping in half echoed through the classroom, and in that split second, Haruto's eyes met hers. Aiko's laughter spilled into the silence, like sunlight breaking through rain. From that instant, something irreversible began. And if you want to follow this story of love, heartbreak, and healing, don't forget to like and subscribe. Because what starts here will stay with you until the very end. The final year of high school in Saitama always carried a strange weight. Teachers spoke about exams as if they were walls rising higher each day, while friends clung to the last fragments of their youth. At 18, Haruto preferred the quiet corners of the classroom, sketching half-finished designs in the margin of his notebooks, keeping his distance from the noisy laughter that filled the air. His friends often joked that he was invisible unless he wanted to be seen. Aiko, on the other hand, was impossible to ignore. She was the girl who walked into a room and made it brighter without even trying. Her voice carried easily, not in an annoying way, but with a clarity that pulled people toward her. She loved to tease her classmates, to argue with teachers about small details, to toss her long black hair back when she laughed. If Haruto was the shadow at the edge of the frame, Aiko was the center of every picture. Their meeting wasn't extraordinary at first glance. The seating chart had placed her beside him after the spring break, when the cherry blossoms had already begun to fall and stick to the soles of students' shoes. On the first day back, she dropped her pencil. Haruto bent down to pick it up. At the exact moment she did, their hands touched. She laughed, he blinked, and something shifted in the air between them. "Thank you," she said, her tone casual, but her eyes lingering for a fraction longer than necessary. Haruto nodded, muttering, "It's nothing." He meant it, and yet it wasn't nothing at all. From then on, Aiko spoke to him almost every day, sometimes about classwork, sometimes about trivial things, like the best ramen place near the station. She had a habit of doodling in his notebooks when he wasn't looking. Flowers, little cats, even once a clumsy caricature of him. He pretended to be annoyed, but secretly he kept every page, even tearing some out, to hide in his drawer at home. Their classmates noticed. "Haruto, you're lucky," one whispered during lunch. He shook his head quickly, but his ears turned red. Aiko only smiled when she overheard, saying nothing, as if the silence itself was an answer. One rainy afternoon, when umbrellas dotted the schoolyard like dark flowers, they found themselves walking home together. The path was narrow, and their shoulders brushed more than once. Aiko twirled her umbrella absent-mindedly. "Do you always walk this way?" she asked. "Sometimes," Haruto replied. "Then maybe I should walk this way too." He glanced at her, unsure if she was joking, but she looked straight ahead, her lips curved in a small, determined smile. From that day, it became routine. After classes, they left together, walking side by side past the convenience store, over the small bridge, down the street, lined with vending machines. Their conversations were light at first, about exams and teachers, but gradually they turned personal. Aiko told him about her dream of studying art abroad. Haruto admitted, in a rare burst of openness, that he wanted to become an architect, to design spaces where people could feel safe. The more they talked, the more their worlds intertwined. Haruto found himself sketching buildings with details she mentioned: a rooftop garden, a window seat, walls painted the color of her favorite hydrangeas. Aiko, in turn, began bringing him books she loved, slipping them into his bag without asking. Still, Haruto hesitated. Every time he thought about confessing, his throat tightened. He feared breaking whatever fragile thing existed between them, but Aiko seemed to sense it, and instead of pushing, she waited. Spring turned into early summer, and with it came a rhythm Haruto had never known. School days no longer felt like a blur of lectures. They carried a pulse, a quiet anticipation. Every morning he glanced toward the entrance, waiting for Aiko's stride, her hair tied loosely, as if she hadn't bothered with perfection because she didn't need to. Their classmates noticed how often they walked together. Some teased, others whispered, still others stared with envy. Aiko brushed it off with laughter, as if gossip were dust in the sunlight. Haruto, however, felt every look burrowing into his skin. "You don't like when people talk, do you?" Aiko asked once, while they shared a can of peach soda. "It's not that," Haruto muttered. "I just don't like being the center of attention." "Then let them look at me," she teased, sipping from the straw. "I don't mind." Her words comforted him more than he admitted. Yet the deeper their connection grew, the more fragile it seemed. At cram school, Aiko laughed too long at another boy's joke. Haruto pressed his pencil harder than necessary against the page. Later, walking home, his silence stretched between them like a rope pulled too tight. "You're quiet," she said. "Nothing's wrong." "Liar," she countered with a smile. "You always go quiet when something bothers you." He wasn't angry, not exactly. More afraid of how quickly jealousy had taken root. Their quarrels, when they came, were never explosive. They unfolded in quiet tones, in the way Haruto avoided her gaze, or the way Aiko's replies grew sharper than she meant. Once, during lunch, she accused him of not trusting her. "I do trust you," Haruto insisted. "Then why do you act like every boy who talks to me is a threat?" He had no answer, only guilt pressing on his chest. But tenderness always returned. On the rooftop, where the summer breeze lifted the edges of her skirt, Aiko leaned into him. "You're stubborn," she murmured. "So are you." "Then maybe that's why we fit." He almost believed her, almost. Exams loomed, adding tension. Teachers piled on homework, classmates whispered about universities, and parents pressed expectations like weights. Aiko dreamed of art school in Tokyo, while Haruto quietly searched for architecture programs far away. Neither dared to admit their fear of distance. One humid evening, cicadas screaming, Aiko invited Haruto to study. Her parents were gone, the house quiet, except for the hum of a fan. Textbooks lay open but forgotten, as she sprawled on the tatami mat, sketching. "Sometimes I wish time would stop right here," she confessed. Haruto looked at her profile, the way her hair clung to her neck, the curve of her hand moving across the page, and wished the same. But reality intruded. The next week, they quarreled again. This time, over something trivial. Aiko had promised to meet him after school, but left with her friends instead. Haruto waited by the gate until the sun dipped low, his frustration mounting. When she finally returned, her laughter faded as she saw his expression. "You could have told me," he said flatly. "I didn't think it mattered." "It mattered to me." The silence that followed was heavier than words. Still, despite everything, their bond endured. They studied together, argued, made up. Haruto walked her home under fireworks at the summer festival, his hand brushing hers but never quite holding it. Aiko leaned closer when crowds pressed around them, whispering jokes only he could hear. In those moments, it felt like nothing could shake them. Yet beneath the surface, the cracks widened, unseen but inevitable. Summer heat pressed against the windows, and with it came a tension Haruto could no longer ignore. The closer he and Aiko grew, the more fragile their bond felt, as if every step forward carried the risk of collapse. It started small. Aiko stopped by the art club more often, where a tall boy named Ren sketched portraits that drew whispers from classmates. Haruto tried not to care, but one afternoon he caught sight of her, laughing with Ren, their heads bent close over a canvas. The image clung to him like a stain. When Aiko returned, cheerful as always, Haruto's silence was sharper than words. "Something wrong?" she asked. Nothing, he said too quickly. But later that evening, walking home, the weight spilled out. You seemed close with him today. Aiko blinked. Ren. He was showing me shading techniques, that's all. Haruto wanted to believe her, but jealousy dug its claws in. You didn't have to laugh at everything he said. Her voice rose, so now I can't laugh. Haruto, he's just a classmate. You don't trust me? The quarrel stretched into days of uneasy silence. Friends noticed, rumors grew. Aiko grew frustrated, Haruto defensive. Their walks home turned shorter, conversations clipped. Still, the pull between them refused to vanish. After school one evening, rain poured suddenly, trapping them under the roof of the gym. Aiko shivered as drops fell from her bangs. Haruto wordlessly offered his jacket. She took it, hugging herself, her eyes softening. You're impossible, she whispered. So are you. For a moment, it felt like forgiveness, but forgiveness didn't erase doubt. The school festival brought everything to a breaking point. Lanterns glowed, music filled the air, and students darted between stalls. Aiko worked at the art booth, Haruto helping with stage decorations. Hours passed before he searched for her, and froze. Across the courtyard, under a string of lights, Ren leaned close. Aiko laughed, her hand brushing his arm. It was innocent, but in Haruto's chest, it exploded like betrayal. When she finally found him, his eyes were cold. Enjoying yourself? He asked. What's that supposed to mean? You know what I mean. Her smile faltered. Haruto, don't start this here. But he already had. Words flared, about trust, about pride, about things neither truly meant, but both were desperate to say. Students glanced over, whispers spread. Aiko's cheeks burned with anger. Maybe you should stop imagining problems that don't exist, she snapped. Maybe you should stop giving me reasons to. The silence after was louder than shouting. Aiko turned away, tears threatening but unshed. Haruto stood rooted, fury and regret twisting together. That night, he lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every word. He hated how much he cared, how jealousy consumed him, how one boy's presence could unravel everything. And yet beneath all the anger, one truth cut deepest. He couldn't imagine a world without her. Aiko, in her own room, pressed her sketchbook closed with trembling hands. She wanted to scream, to explain, to make him see that Ren meant nothing. But pride locked her throat. She loved Haruto, but his mistrust sliced at her like a blade. The cracks had grown wide. Neither knew if they could be sealed. Autumn arrived with crimson leaves clinging to the schoolyard trees. But for Haruto and Aiko, the warmth of summer had already faded. Their conversations thinned, their laughter dulled, and even the familiar walk home became heavy with silence. The cultural festival should have been a chance to reset. Lights strung across the courtyard, stalls lined with food, music weaving through the night air. It was the kind of event that made everyone forget exams and obligations. For Aiko, it was also her chance to display her artwork. Canvases lined the booth, bright with color, alive with her touch. Haruto admired them from a distance, pride and longing twisting inside him. But when he returned from helping backstage, the sight froze his blood. Aiko stood with Ren, under the glow of paper lanterns. She laughed, her cheeks flushed, and when the crowd surged, Ren leaned in close, too close. Haruto's chest clenched as he saw her lips meet his, a brief kiss that felt like a knife. The world around him blurred. Music, voices, laughter, all muffled into nothing. Only the image of Aiko and Ren remained. When she spotted him, her smile vanished. Haruto. But he was already walking away, his steps quick, his hands trembling. Later, behind the gym, she found him. The lantern light didn't reach his face, but the anger in his voice cut sharp. "Was that a joke to you?" "It wasn't," she swallowed. "It just happened. I didn't mean—" "You didn't mean?" He laughed bitterly. "You let him kiss you, Aiko. I saw it." Her eyes brimmed with tears. "You think I don't regret it? I was stupid. You think regret changes what I saw?" His voice broke. "All this time, I trusted you. I wanted to. And you, Haruto, please." Her hands reached for him, but he stepped back. For the first time, Haruto looked at her, not with longing, but with a wall of pain he couldn't lower. "We're done." The words hung between them, heavier than any silence. Aiko's lips parted, but no sound came. She watched him walk away, the distance between them widening into something she couldn't cross. In the days that followed, whispers spread through the halls. Some sided with Haruto, others pitied Aiko. She threw herself into her art, her sketchbook pages filling with lines too harsh, colors too dark. Haruto, meanwhile, buried himself in study, his notebooks filled with rigid lines of buildings, anything to keep his thoughts from circling back to her. But neither escaped. Haruto caught himself pausing at the gate, waiting for footsteps that never came. Aiko, walking home alone, stared at the empty spaces beside her, hearing echoes of laughter that used to be theirs. At night, both replayed the moment under the lanterns, the kiss, the look, the breaking point. Neither could rewrite it. Neither could undo it. And yet, beneath the regret and anger, something still tethered them together. A thread stretched thin, invisible, but unbroken. Winter crept in, and graduation loomed. The hallways buzzed with talk of universities, part-time jobs, and uncertain futures. For Haruto and Aiko, the weeks dragged in silence. They passed each other in corridors without a word, two ghosts sharing the same space, yet neither was free. Haruto still carried her in every sketch, rooftops shaped by the curve of her smile, windows tinted with the shade of her laughter. Aiko, in turn, found her drawings bending unconsciously toward him, a figure standing at the edge of every canvas, faceless yet undeniably Haruto. On the day of the farewell ceremony, the gym filled with rows of students in neat uniforms. Teachers spoke of perseverance and dreams, but Haruto heard none of it. His eyes betrayed him, searching until they found her among the crowd. She looked older somehow, her expression solemn, her gaze fixed forward. When the ceremony ended, friends clustered in groups, laughing, taking photos. Haruto lingered by the exit, unsure why. Then he saw her. Aiko stood beneath the archway, her sketchbook clutched tightly to her chest. She noticed him, froze, and for a long moment neither moved. It was she who stepped forward first. "Haruto." He hadn't heard her voice in months, yet it was achingly familiar. "Aiko." They stood in awkward silence, surrounded by the noise of celebration. Finally, she held out the sketchbook. "I was going to give this to you, but I wasn't sure if you'd want it." He hesitated, then took it. Inside were drawings of rooftops, gardens, bridges, all pieces of the places they had walked together. His chest tightened. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Not just for that night, for everything, for hurting you, for letting pride get in the way." Haruto swallowed hard. "I wasn't fair either. I doubted you, even before, and I let jealousy ruin us." Tears welled in her eyes. "I thought you hated me." "I tried," he admitted softly, "but I couldn't." The words broke something open. Suddenly they were talking, truly talking, for the first time in months, about the kiss, about trust, about fear of losing each other. Their voices cracked, tears fell, but with every confession the weight between them lifted. By evening, the schoolyard was nearly empty. They stood by the gate, the sky streaked with pale orange. Aiko wiped her eyes and laughed weakly. "We're a mess." Haruto smiled faintly. "Maybe, but maybe we're worth fixing." She looked at him, hope flickering through her exhaustion. "Do you really think so?" He nodded. "I don't want to let go, Aiko. Not again." Her hand trembled as she reached for his, and this time he didn't pull away. Their fingers intertwined, fragile but certain. As the last bell rang in the distance, the gate behind them swung shut. It felt like an ending, but also, finally, a beginning. Years slipped by, carrying them beyond the narrow hallways of their high school into a wider, harsher world. Haruto left for Tokyo, chasing architecture, while Aiko pursued art with the same fierce spark that had once drawn him in. They wrote at first, then called, then saw each other on stolen weekends. Distance was cruel, and temptation lingered, but the memory of that winter night, by the school gate, became an anchor neither of them let go. By their early 20s, the sting of betrayal had faded into a scar, a reminder, but no longer a wound. They had stumbled, broken apart, and chosen to return. That choice shaped everything. One spring afternoon, Haruto invited Aiko to the rooftop garden of the building he had designed, his first real project. The city sprawled below them, restless and loud, but up here it was quiet, softened by vines and the faint scent of hydrangeas. Aiko stood in awe, her sketchbook tucked under her arm. "You've actually built it," she whispered. Haruto nodded, nervous despite himself. "And I want to build one more thing." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small box. When he opened it, the ring caught the sunlight, modest yet steady. "Aiko," he said, his voice low but certain. "I don't want to sketch a future without you. Will you marry me?" Her hand flew to her mouth, eyes filling with tears. For a heartbeat, she only stared, as if the moment were too fragile to touch. Then she nodded, once, twice, unable to speak. When she finally found her voice, it broke on a laugh. "Yes, of course, yes." They married in early summer, in a small ceremony, attended by family and the few friends who had stood beside them through every storm. Aiko wore a simple white dress, her hair pinned with fresh blossoms. Haruto couldn't stop staring, as though every sketch he had ever drawn had been waiting for her to step into it. The vows were quiet, unadorned by grand speeches. They didn't need them. Every quarrel, every apology, every night, spent doubting and choosing again, had already written their promises long before. Afterward, at the reception, Aiko pulled him aside, away from the chatter. "Do you realize," she said softly, "we almost lost this?" Haruto held her hand, the ring glinting faintly in the light. "Maybe that's why it means so much now." She leaned into him, her voice warm against his shoulder. "Let's never let pride get in the way again." He smiled, kissing her hair. "Never." Later that night, as they walked together beneath a sky freckled with stars, Haruto thought back to the first moment. The snap of chalk, the sound of her laughter filling a classroom. It felt like another lifetime, and yet also as if no time had passed at all. Love had not been easy. It had been fragile, wounded, tested, but it had endured. And as Aiko's fingers tightened around his, Haruto knew with absolute certainty, this was the life they had both been waiting for.